appropriate that an organization devoted to the delivery of children would be called PUA. A lot of women are called Shifra these days. I do not know any women.
I know one.
Do you really know one?
It's a second name.
Second, okay, that's fine. But Rabbi Elan Siegelman is a guiding force in PUA, which helps us enjoy the fruits of women who were unable to deliver before. And I'm going to introduce him. He will be followed by Dr. Tony Tsai, who is the Director of Reproductive Endocrinology and Fertility at NYPQ. You're not going to find two better people to talk about this topic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elan. Thank you very much to Etz Chaim and to Queens New York Presbyterian for tonight's very important event. I'm very excited to...
we just stand over there, just so I just have to manually change the slide.
I'm going to have to stand next to the computer.
Okay.
The most important question that I have to ask is, when am I finishing?
Whenever you finish.
So,
Don't remove your watch.
yeah. So, I mean, all right.
So fast and finish soon.
That's right. Okay, buckle up, everyone. We're going to be here for a long time.
Kept his watch on.
There's a clock in the back. Okay.
Welcome to come back Shavuos night.
That's
Spend
right.
the whole night.
That's right. Okay. So what I would like to do tonight, I know that we don't have so much time, and we also are privileged to have Dr. Tsai with us this evening to present from the medical angle, but I would like to present from the halachic angle. And we'll begin tonight's evening with a background or a tour, if you will, of infertility through the prism of halacha, and it's something that I think we all ought to realize, that when we have a couple, a young couple, an older couple, a couple who are suffering with infertility, so it's not just the fact that they don't have children and they come to shul every Shabbos and they go out to meals at other people's homes and they're surrounded by children, even without the social scene. Just look at the calendar. All of the Yomim Tovim, many of the Yomim Tovim are centralized around the children. Pesach and Sukkot there and Shavuos, we teach the children not to wake up Tati because Tati's sleeping because he was up all night. But each and every Chanukah and Purim, we're always encouraging the children to get involved. Our calendar is really very focused on children, and it's very difficult for the couple to live amongst in the Jewish community, amongst their friends and their neighbors who are, Baruch Hashem, do have children. We have to be super sensitive, but not only that, we have to realize that the couple, beyond their frustration and their disappointment and their aggravation of not having children, they're also the ones who are pursuing fertility treatment. We have to realize that there are a whole slew of halachos, a whole slew of Jewish laws that have to be navigated very carefully, because the potential issues that these couples are dealing with are really significant, and they're really serious and complicated questions, sometimes ones that their local Orthodox rabbis may not even be familiar with all of the halachos, and therefore it's a privilege for me to be here as a representative of PUA, an organization which really specializes in fertility and halacha, to address you this evening. And I just want to point out that PUA, it's true that PUA was one of the midwives, but also it's an acronym. It stands for Puriut Urefuah Al Pi Halacha. So Puriut is fertility, and Refuah, so fertility and medicine, Al Pi Halacha, according to Jewish law. So what is infertility? Let's begin with a medical definition. A medical definition is defined by the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, the ASRM, is the inability to achieve a pregnancy and live birth within a 12-month window of unprotected intercourse. Okay, so generally this is with couples who are under the age of 35, in their, let's say, their prime years, the age where they are most successful having children. They're together for 1 year with unprotected intercourse. They're unable to achieve a healthy pregnancy and live delivery. Sometimes we have women who suffer from recurrent miscarriages, which is also a form of infertility. They can get pregnant. However, at 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, different women have different issues, and that will govern at what point, unfortunately, they have a miscarriage, but recurrent miscarriage is also, unfortunately, recurrent pregnancy loss is one of the factors, would be considered infertility as well, because they're unable to have a successful live birth, and approximately 1 out of every 7 couples suffer from infertility. So that's a pretty high number. That is a medical definition. And just something to think about when we discuss halacha, there is a Gemara in Yevamos. And the Gemara in Yevamos says, Nasa Isha, Vishaha Ima Eser Shanim, Vilo Yalda, ... The Gemara has a whole discussion. And the Gemara is dealing with a case of a couple who perhaps you're familiar with such a halacha, that sometimes we don't paskin like this, but the Gemara entertains the possibility that a couple who live together for 10 years and they're unable to have a child, so the Gemara discusses potential divorce, the Gemara discusses all different possibilities. But if you look there at that Gemara, and again the content of that Gemara is not so relevant for tonight, but what is relevant is that the Gemara's discussion only begins after the couple were together for 10 years. That's a very drastic... Sorry about that. It's a very different. That is a very different definition of infertility between the medical definition and the halachic definition. We're not saying that the halachic definition is 10 years, but it's something to consider. At what point do we classify or do we determine a couple to have been who is unsuccessful to be considered infertile, and then allow them to begin undergoing fertility treatment? What are some common causes of infertility? So age is a big one. Unfortunately, due to the female fertility system, the way things work is that by the age of, this is really a medical question we can direct to the doctor, but by the age of 35 plus, 35 to 40, female fertility takes a downward, there is a downward drop, and then 40 to 44 it gets even steeper, and then 44 and above, the success rates of even of IVF with a 44-year-old woman with her own eggs is pretty low.
And the risks also get higher.
Risks.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the idea is the reason why it's harder for them to conceive is because the chromosomal abnormalities of the eggs as they get older, in the event that they do get pregnant and they are able to actually carry out the pregnancy, yes, the risks of chromosomally abnormal children is also higher with those women because of the egg quality at such an age. But age is a big factor. Irregular periods or PCOS, I'm sure the doctor is going to discuss. Irregular bleeding, and we'll talk about that. Early ovulation is a classic one. Is a classic cause for infertility, specifically in the Jewish world, in the Orthodox world, where we are sensitive to the halachos of taharat mishpacha, where we're sensitive to the halachos of mikvah, and we are unable to be intimate. A couple is unable to be intimate before going to the mikvah, and that really has to take place before ovulation. Should a mikvah fall out after the woman's ovulation, so we know that a woman can only get pregnant if she is intimate with her husband before, perhaps on ovulation, but certainly if the intercourse takes place after ovulation, the couple will not get pregnant. So if the mikvah falls out after ovulation, the couple unfortunately will not get pregnant. That is an issue that doctors such as Dr. Tsai, who is familiar with the Orthodox world, that's something on their radar screens. I've had conversations with doctors, and this issue simply was not relevant. They weren't thinking about it because that's not what you learn in medical school. You don't learn about early ovulation and its conflict with mikvah. That's just not in the curriculum. But we are sensitive to it, and it's wonderful to work with doctors who are familiar with the Jewish community and familiar with our practices, and they can really help us. Varicocele and surgeries in the abdominal area, hernias in men. I know that in the world people think that infertility is a women's issue, but I think the studies are 30% or maybe 40% of infertility can be attributed to the male factor. It's a male issue. And varicoceles in the scrotum affects sperm development and sperm quality, as well as surgeries in the abdominal hernia area. That can be a major contributor to male factor infertility. Always something to consider. Undescended testicles when a baby was younger. All of these do play a factor in male infertility. And you have genetic issues, genetic abnormalities. Almost, it's like in my world when we deal with infertility, so everyone we meet with has issues with infertility. So kind of like everyone you see, it automatically has infertility. So I feel like something like Klinefelter's or Turner syndrome is so common. It's really not that common, but in the world of infertility, these are very common genetic abnormalities. Turner syndrome, instead of a woman having two X's, instead of an XX, she's lacking that second X. And the way that manifests itself is in her ovarian function, and she basically doesn't have any eggs. She needs an egg donation. And Klinefelter's, instead of having an XY, when a male is XY, instead of a male being XY, he's XXY, he has an additional X, and that very often it causes the lack of sperm production, certainly not in the ejaculate, very often not in the ejaculate, but sometimes not even in the testicle at all. Typically, people with Klinefelter's are very tall and skinny. Sometimes they have breast development, and Turner syndrome, they're shorter with a webbed neck. So whenever I'm walking with my wife and we see someone very tall, she gives me you think he has Klinefelter? I said, not everyone who's very tall, but it's something which is common. Just this past Thursday night, I met with a couple that he has Klinefelter syndrome. And they came to discuss their fertility. And last I have here Rakitansky. A couple of times I've had cases of women with Rakitansky syndrome, and that's when a woman is born without a uterus. They're absolutely born with zero uterus, sometimes not even a vaginal opening, and it's such a woman is unable to carry a baby. So genetic issues are also a major contributor to infertility. I don't want to get too in detail because I want to leave time for the doctor. But when we're dealing with early ovulation, there's two different types of early ovulation. This is really an issue when it comes to halacha and hilchos nida. It's something really to be careful about. Early ovulation is a major contributor to infertility amongst the Orthodox population. You can have two different types of early ovulation. It's important to point out this distinction. Ovulation usually occurs when? If you have a 28-day cycle. So we'll send this question out to the crowd. You can't answer, doctor. 28 days is your cycle. At what point? Which day is the woman going to ovulate? Day 14, very good. Around the 14. So in a typical cycle, a woman has a 28-day cycle. She ovulates on day 14. And when does she go to the mikvah? Day 12. So if she goes to the mikvah on day 12, and then she ovulates on day 14, that sounds like a perfect shidduch, right? But what happens if she has a shorter cycle, like a 21-day cycle, a 24-day cycle? So if she has a 21-day cycle, when is her ovulation going to take place? On day 7. Maybe day 8. When is she going to get to mikvah? Day 12. She's still going to get to mikvah day 12. She's still going to wait 5 and 7 before she goes to mikvah. She is going to miss her ovulation. If she has a short cycle, her ovulation is going to be too early. She's going to miss ovulation because she's keeping taharas mishpacha. Alternatively, you can have women who have long bleeding. It's not that they have a shorter cycle. It's that it doesn't take them 12 days to get to the mikvah. Sometimes it takes them 13 days, 14 days, 15 days to get to the mikvah. And while their mikvah calendar is while she's counting days to get to the mikvah, her fertility her fertility clock is also ticking. And if she doesn't get to the mikvah until after day 12 because she has long bleeding and she's unable to make it to the mikvah by day 12, that too can be a contributor to infertility. So how do we solve these? So there's some medical options, there's some halachic options, whether it's clomid or estrogen. Estrogen is if a woman takes estrogen in the beginning of her cycle, so taking estrogen, it's an inhibitor with FSH. FSH is the hormone that's secreted by the brain that tells the ovaries to start to start producing eggs. FSH stands for follicle-stimulating hormone, and the follicle-stimulating hormone tells the ovaries to start making those follicles, bringing them to the surface, start maturing those eggs, that we can begin the process of ovulation. Generally what happens is when FSH is secreted, the level of estrogen goes down. Right? So there was I actually, with the ASRM conference a few years ago, I met Dr. Michael Dahan from McGill in Montreal, and he actually put out a paper years ago. He was one of the first doctors to write about this, to solve this issue of infertility in the Orthodox Jewish community by giving the women estrogen in the very beginning of their cycle to keep the estrogen levels up in the body, which would thereby suppress the FSH. And then she would take it for a series of days, let's say 5 days. During those days, the estrogen level is going to be quite high, and that would prevent the whole cycle from beginning, because as long as the estrogen is high, the brain is not going to secrete FSH. Once she stops taking the estrogen level goes down, so then the FSH is going to begin, the production of FSH is going to begin, then the cycle is going to be normal, but by that time you bought yourself an extra 5 days to allow her to now get to the mikvah on time before her ovulation. I believe that's a common, doctor, it's a common way of dealing with this issue, and I think Baruch Hashem, it's quite successful. Other issues, other options are natural or organic supplements, which are available. Definitely, they're available in Eretz Yisrael. Some of them are available here. And IUI, worst comes to worst, we'll discuss it in a moment. If the woman needs some type of insemination because she can't be intimate with her husband. I'm actually dealing with a case now where a woman ovulates on day 9 of her cycle, day 9, and she can only get to mikvah on day 11. So she's a Sfardiya. So she doesn't have to keep 12 days, she keeps 11 days, but she still can't get to the mikvah, and it's impossible that we can make her cycle any shorter. So we're now considering doing an insemination, taking her husband's sperm and inseminating her during nidus while she's still in nida. That's a question maybe we'll discuss in a few moments, but there won't be any physical intimacy, there won't be any contact between husband and wife. Everything will be done in a laboratory through insemination. There are some halachic issues trying to get to the women to the mikveh earlier, but this is a very important and relevant topic which I think it's important to be aware of because it's just so common. In general, if early ovulation, if that's not the issue, and we have let's say it's another issue. We know that she's ovulating after the mikvah, but she's simply not pregnant, so very often we go to something called IUI, intrauterine insemination. And IUI is used for different reasons. Unexplained infertility, sometimes we don't know why the couple's not getting pregnant, so maybe a first step of fertility, we'll give them an insemination. You take the husband's sperm and you deliver it to the top of the uterus, right by the opening of the fallopian tubes, and that will, we can cut the sperm some slack. They're not such great swimmers. If they get tired and they're unable to make the journey from the vaginal canal all the way to the top of the fallopian tubes. So this, we conveniently deliver it exactly where it's supposed to go, and often that's helpful. I am so sorry.